I can think of just about anything that I'd rather do is to play golf with George and Walt. My guess is that there is a commandment that gets left out in that whole round of golf. I'll let y'all figure out what it is. Right, Walt?
That's right.
That's what I thought.
This was for the Orange Grove charity. Every year they have a tournament, and this year they received genuine trophies. Every one of those trophies, George saw those. They were topped by an 18-karat solid gold golf ball.
Well, that's great.
And we played with a flat belly.
Well, I think that what you were doing and the charity that you were doing it for is the right thing to do. That didn't improve my desire to be with you and George on the golf course. I'll just contribute.
Well, we had a flat belly. You know, for those who don't know golf, a flat belly is someone who is really young and hits the ball 300 yards. And in spite of that, George was on the team and we didn't win.
Okay, we'll let our imagination now go for the rest of the day about your and George's bellies. So, we welcome our new singles minister. Her coming reminds me of the story that John Stewart told me many years ago about a little man that's walking down the street and a little boy has got a basket full of kittens that he's selling. And the man says, well, what kind of kittens are these? And the little boy said, they're Methodist. And the man says, what do you mean? He says, they've opened their eyes. Well, she was a Baptist, I was a Baptist, many of you all were Baptist at some point. So we've opened our eyes. Well, we welcome you to our church.
Not much different.
Well, we're glad you're here. You know, I seldom have disappointment with any of our class members, and I seldom have a bone to pick with any of them and seldom feel let down, but I must admit this morning that I feel disappointed and let down by one of our class members. I had to go to an event last night that involved a tuxedo. I'm kind of a old raggedy shirt type person. And so when I go to an event that involves a tuxedo, I go looking for moral support. Usually that has come from Boyd Cobb, because I know he's as miserable there as I probably am. And Boyd was on a mission trip helping the people of the world and left me empty-handed at the event. So Boyd, I appreciate that. You must remember in the future that in those circumstances, I'm your mission trip. Susan and I saw a guy dressed last night at this event in a kilt. We've decided that that's what Boyd needs. So Boyd, you can make all this up just next time, a kilt, okay? They probably have auburn, orange, and blue kilts. Yeah, Elvis, yeah. So we appreciate all of y'all being here today, and we will go through this week and these days ahead of us fondly remembering our friend Estelle Kimsey. My son, who you have to watch because he'll play any kind of trick or joke on you that he possibly can, came to me a few weeks ago and he said, I've got a movie that I want you to see. I can't even tell you where my mind went with that, and I imagined myself in his recommended movie being embarrassed that I was there. I said, well, son, what kind of movie is it? And he said, oh, it's kind you like, it's a Western. And I thought, well, now that's very true. And so I come out of that generation, as some of you all do, and that come from Gunsmoke and Bonanza, and I can still name all the brothers on Bonanza, and I bet you can too. And so I like Westerns, and so I thought, well, that's okay. And then he said it's by these people called the Coen brothers, and that may not be somebody you're familiar with, but the Coen brothers write and direct and produce movies that are at least really different and really interesting. And so the Coen brothers created a Western called The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Now, I am not recommending for you to go out and see that because probably there would be parts of it that you would find offensive or whatever. But the Coen brothers are Jewish, and they are said to be very, very atheistic and nihilistic, and so sometimes their movies kind of have that kind of an edge to it. I don't know if I agree with that. There is a German word, Götterdämmerung, and you'll be tested on that next week. And Götterdämmerung means the god of the dusk, or the god of the twilight. And the Coen brothers believe that there are times in life in which God kind of maybe is a little bit hidden in gray area. And so I don't think for a minute that they think there's no God. I just think they believe that there are times in life in which the presence of God is not always crystal clear. And so at any rate, I've decided if I ever become a philosophy teacher again, I'm going to take this movie, divide it up into its 6 vignettes, and boy, that would make a good philosophy class for people to discuss and talk about. Now again, I didn't recommend you go see that movie, okay? However, at the end of that movie, there is a vignette that has really intrigued me an awfully lot. It starts off in a very, very Western scene. It starts off with a guy driving a stagecoach down a road. It starts off with that stagecoach being very much bright in the sunshine, and then it kind of ends up with things going pretty gloomy and pretty dark. You realize before long that these stagecoach passengers are headed to something more than the Fort Morgan that is their supposed destination, and it's not very long until you kind of realize that that stagecoach driver and that stagecoach are kind of taking them to the other side, as it were. And so they are kind of passing over. In a stagecoach there are 5 people, and so the main part of the movie takes place as these 5 people kind of discuss the meaning of life. That's a perfect Coen brothers theme. There is a trapper, and oh Lord, he looks so real on that screen that you can almost smell the fact that he's probably not taken a bath in months and months. And he has a philosophy of life. And he says, human beings are like ferrets that I've trapped. He said, we're all just alike, and we all kind of come and go just like ferrets. And he said, we try to escape getting skinned, but finally something comes along and catches us and skins us, and we're gone. That human beings are like animals. That's his philosophy of life. Then they have this older woman, and oh Lord, she exudes primness and properness, and she is dressed in black and has so many layers on her that she's protected from the trapper and everybody else. And of course, there prominently in her lap is the Word of God. And she begins to talk about how her husband was a prominent preacher and how they had lived their lives going across the world preaching the gospel. And so when she gives her philosophy of life, she says that the people are divided into 2 groups. They're either saints or they're sinners. They're either going to heaven or they're going to go to hell, and it's simple as that. And I got the Word of God here to prove it to me. A third character that's on this stagecoach headed for eternity is a slick-looking French gambler that has found his way to the West, and he talks about how he's gone all over the western part of the United States looking for a card game, and how he's become very wealthy, bilking drunk Americans out of their money. And he said that if he talks about his philosophy of life, that it's really pretty simple, that it comes down to whether you're lucky or whether you're unlucky. And then finally, there are 2 guys who are called reapers. You kind of feel like that they're kind of part of this whole scene, getting these people through their passing zone. And they're bounty hunters. They even have a dead body on top of the stagecoach that they're going to collect money off of. And after everybody's kind of had their conversation, one of them taps the floor and gets everybody's attention with his cane, and they said, you all are all wrong. We're not just ferrets. We're not just saints or sinners. We're not just lucky or unlucky. We're either dead or we're alive. So I kind of been processing that for a couple of weeks because there's a lot of options that are there. And I kind of began to try to figure out what I thought was the best of the four options, and none of them really kind of totally pleased me. And I began to think, is there a better answer than what these people were giving? Does it all come down to us being animals? Does it all come down to us being saints or sinners? Does it all come down to us being lucky or unlucky? Does it all come down to us being alive or dead? And so I don't know if you've been watching it, but if you watch PBS, I hope you do. They have wonderful shows. And Ken Burns, who's famous for all these many shows he's done across the years, has done a wonderful piece on Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens. If you haven't seen that, I am recommending that. That is a wonderful thing to watch. And so I've been spending my time kind of going back and becoming reacquainted with Mark Twain, and I got my answer to the Coen brothers. Mark Twain says there's two kinds of people in the world. Now listen to this real careful, and then go think about it all week. Mark Twain says there's two kinds of people in the world. He says, number one, there are people who are born. That includes all of us, by the way. There are people that are born. And then he says, there are people who come to the day when they figure out why they were born. Now that's pretty deep. I think that's a better answer than what came on the stagecoach. It's not just that we're born and we die. We all understand that. It's not just that we're lucky or unlucky. We understand that. It's not that there aren't saints and sinners. We understand that. And sometimes people can't even be, like the trapper said, like animals. But the fact is that we all are born, and that we do kind of come to a place, if we're lucky, where we figure out why we were born. There's a guy named Gilbert Ryle, and Gilbert Ryle was an English philosopher. He's not as well known, of course, as Mark Twain. Gilbert Ryle said that there's three kinds of knowledge that we are exposed to. He says, first of all, there is knowing that. Knowing that. And he uses the example of a bicycle. And he says that somewhere along the way we come to learn that is a bicycle and not a tricycle. That is a bicycle and not a motorcycle. That is a bicycle and not a house. That's a bicycle and not a horse. And so we are really good at that. We learn a lot of the different ways to define the world that's around us. So we know a lot about knowing that. Then Gilbert Ryle says there is knowing how. And we're familiar with that because we've often used the expression know how. And again he talks about the bicycle. And he says that somewhere along the way we learn how to ride that bicycle. And that's one of those interesting things that if you do it enough, like most of us did in our childhood, we could probably go get on one right now and we'd still be able to do it. And so we know how to ride a bicycle. He even extends that concept to understanding that there are some people who know how to repair bicycles. My father and I developed a good part of our relationship because I couldn't break them badly enough and he couldn't fix them. And watching him, I learned how to repair bicycles. And when my kids came along with bicycles, then I could really help out. I don't know exactly what to do with my grandkids' motorized scooter boards. I don't suggest any of you all try that any more than a Coen Brothers movie. But at any rate, there is knowing how. But then Gilbert Ryle says, but there's also knowing why. And he said, then we really get to something significant, because we as human beings come to the place of understanding why we like to ride a bicycle through a beautiful countryside on a cool day with someone that we love. You see the difference? There is knowing that, and it's important. there is knowing how, and it's important. But there's also knowing why something appeals to us and defines us and makes us like we are, and that finds value and importance to us. Knowing why we're alive is very, very significant. That old Friedrich Nietzsche, who was a German philosopher that most people have looked upon as kind of an early Coen brother, I guess, and think that he only thought bad thoughts. Nietzsche was really pretty smart. And Nietzsche said there's two levels to life. He said there's a how level that defines our functionality and the way we learn to do things and the way we can become accomplished and the way that we can have skills and talents. There's a how level to life. But Nietzsche said there's also a why level to life. Why we do the things we do, why we live the way we are, and why we make the choices that we make. And then Nietzsche said one of the most important things I ever heard in my life. And he thought Jesus was important, by the way. Nietzsche said, without an adequate why for your life, you can't live. Without an adequate why for your life, you can't live. And I think that's what Mark Twain was trying to say. I think he was trying to say we come to a time in our life where we're not just born, but we come to some determination and insight about what is the adequate why for our lives. Now, Nietzsche was absolutely wrong, of course, because you can live without an adequate why for your life, and a lot of people certainly do that. But I think that if we're ever able to find an adequate why for our lives, then I think our life takes on a different kind of vigor. I think it takes on a different kind of beauty. I think it takes on a different kind of texture and a different kind of integrity that is very, very significant. When I think about it, Estelle Kinsey, I think that in her love of Wendy and in her care of Steve, in the joy that she brought to people's lives, that here was somebody who had found an adequate why for her life. And that's what we all need to do, is to find an adequate why for our lives. You know, when you come to the Bible, it's interesting how the word why doesn't come up very much. But when it does, it's kind of an important kind of a moment in the Bible. I can give you 2 or 3 examples of what I'm talking about. If you look into the life of Jesus, there's a time in which Jesus is very, very busy about his life. He's coming down to the time of his end of his earthly ministry. There are a lot of forces and factors that are coming to play in his life. And his friend Lazarus dies. And when that word reaches Jesus, he gathers his disciples together, and while there were other pressing priorities, he makes his way off to Bethany, where his friends lived, where he had often gone, where he had found comfort and love. And before he gets to the house, he's met on the street by one of the sisters of Lazarus. And she says to Jesus, "Why weren't you here?" And it's almost like if you read that scripture closely, you could almost read the presence of a very pregnant pause or a very quiet moment that's stilling. And stilling to Jesus. Because maybe even for a moment, Jesus asked himself why he wasn't there. Or maybe even for a moment, Jesus had the chance to say, you know, I may have had a bigger reason for being alive than what I was doing up for Jerusalem. I may have had a bigger reason for being alive than all the people I was trying to teach or all the people I was trying to help up there in the city at Passover. Maybe for a moment Jesus was saying, I may have needed to be right here. And I may have needed to be right here with these people. The question why becomes a defining moment for us sometimes. And sometimes in our lives, we get busy even in well-doing. and still have times in which we may have needed to be somewhere else or may have needed to do something else. And sometimes life has asked us the question, why weren't you here? That kind of takes us to a different level of looking at why we are alive. Jesus asked that question. Jesus asked that question in a way that's almost a counterpoint to the Lazarus story, if you think about it. Jesus has been resurrected, and he is in the garden, the Bible story tells us. And suddenly in the garden comes Mary Magdalene. And Mary Magdalene is there for probably just showing reverence to Jesus who's dead. And Mary Magdalene is there probably trying to carry out some of the post-death rituals of the Jewish faith. And Jesus encounters her, and she is so surprised or so unwilling to even think about the possibility of Jesus being alive that she doesn't at first recognize him, and a why question comes up. And Jesus says to her, why are you seeking the living among the dead? Now that's very interesting, especially if you think about it as a counterpoint to the Lazarus story. Because there are times in life when the question is, why weren't you here to attend to us in our time of sorrow, our time of need? But there may be other times in which the why question is, why do we keep dwelling in the graveyard? And there's life beyond the graveyard, and there's life that we need to move to, and there are things that we need to do. Why are you seeking the living among the dead, Mary? Maybe there's a time in which we move beyond the graveyard to the living. Defining those kinds of questions are not like an American Western that's been redone by some very philosophically inventive people. It's the kind of questions we experience every day. And of course then there is that major why question that rises from the book of the Old Testament, from the book of Job. And there's that question that perpetuates itself into our lives of why bad things, like those bad things that happened to Job, why do they happen to good people like Job was? Greeks had an answer for that. They said if we're rational, then nothing but good things of virtue and happiness will happen to us. That hadn't worked out so well. The Hebrews believed that if we were good, like Job was, that only things of virtue and happiness would follow us. It doesn't always work out like that. But sometimes when we're plunged into the midst of the why questions, then we begin to try to figure out how we can live in a world and how we can live in lives in which good things do happen to very rational and sometimes very decent people. And sometimes struggling with that question helps us define who we are. And so let Mark Twain speak to you this morning. You were all born. What's your answer? Why were you born? Calvin's answer is there's a plan, and you're just kind of following that plan. Jacob Arminius, who kind of was at the backdrop of the Baptist faith and the Methodist faith, said, no, you're born because you're going to be plunged down into a world in which you've got to make choices. And it's your business of living to make choices. And to make those choices in the strongest and best way that you can. Maybe to ask why a lot. I think that's one instance where Arminius and the Baptists and the Methodists were probably on the right side of things. We are plunged down into a world where we make choices. And we ask why. And the way we answer those choices defines our lives. I have my answer. My answer comes right out of the Bible. It comes right from Jesus. Jesus tells us that we should not become weary in well-doing. And I think a lot of you get up every morning trying to live by that. And I think a lot of you get up every morning and trying to find ways to not become weary in well-doing. in spite of the fact that some people are like ferrets, like animals. In spite of the fact that some people are saints and sinners, and some people are lucky and unlucky, and some people live and die. I believe the answer is we live in a world in which we make choices, and God calls upon us not to become weary in well-doing. And we are met with life every day that asks us to define what for us in our moment constitutes well-doing. I'll end on a maybe funnier note, but maybe not. I got caught up in one of those kind of conversations that I seem like I always get caught up in. One of those kind of conversations that especially I try to stay away from nowadays. And so I got caught up in a dinner at one of my trips to do some business with about 5 or 6 other guys. And one guy asked a why question. And I think it was important to him, and his why question was, why do you think God allowed Donald Trump to be president of the United States? I don't think this guy has a MAGA hat. One of the other people in the group said, God knew that we needed Donald Trump. Just ask Jerry Falwell Jr., he'll tell you that. And that we needed a disruptor that would take us away from this left wing that we had gone out on. That guy doesn't have a MAGA hat. One guy, trying to lighten the conversation, said, well, I've always thought God had a strange sense of humor, and this just proves it. I didn't lighten the conversation, but I was just getting down a little further under the table. And so finally, they're all looking at me and they're saying to me, what's your answer to the why question, Steve? I was real proud of myself. My wife was proud of me because I didn't get caught up in some kind of political squabble. My answer was, what we've got to remember is that God didn't vote. And that's right. God doesn't vote. We vote. And I'm not talking about presidential elections. I'm talking about well-doing. And everyday life asks us, why are we alive today? Why are we alive today? And it's when we figure that out, and it begins to move us in the direction of the actions that we take, that our life may find meaning. And it's not just an old stagecoach carrying us off into eternity. Why are you alive today? Could it possibly be to live one more day not being weary in well-doing, and living our lives in a way in which our choices are for well-doing? Why are we alive today? Let us pray. We're thankful, our Father, if we have a faith that we would define as a belief in your Son and his way of living that in fact becomes the pulsating, adequate why at the core of our lives. Help us that being like your Son becomes a more than sufficient, adequate why to direct us and to guide us in our daily living. Help us to know, Father, that you give us freedom, that you do not cast our votes for us, but that every day with the choices that we make, we cast the vote of whether we're going to be well-doing people and people that find opportunities to care and people that respond to needs that meet us along the way. We're thankful that we're born. and that we have the chance to live, even today. Help us that we might contemplate why we're alive and what we're going to do about that. For we ask in Jesus' name. Thank y'all for coming today. We'll see you later.